There's a specific kind of frustration that's hard to explain. Your life isn't collapsing, nothing is visibly broken, you're functioning. And yet, something feels stalled. Not chaotic, not dramatic, just unmoving. That quiet tension is confusing because there's no clear problem to fix. So you assume the problem must be you. Maybe you're not trying hard enough. Maybe you're ungrateful. Maybe you're just lazy. But feeling stuck in a stable life is rarely about effort. It's usually about identity.
Most people think movement in life is driven by goals, but goals sit on the surface. Identity sits underneath. You can set new goals without updating who you believe you are. And when that happens, your behavior eventually slows down to match your self-concept. Because identity regulates consistency, not motivation. Here's the deeper layer. At some point, you formed a working definition of yourself, not consciously, but gradually. Through early feedback, through expectations placed on you, through roles you learned to perform well. Responsible, reliable, quiet, independent, high-achieving, low risk. Those identities helped you navigate your environment. But identities that once protected you can later restrict you. Growth requires expansion, and expansion destabilizes familiarity. So when you begin to outgrow a version of yourself, something subtle happens. Your awareness evolves before your identity does. You start sensing that your current patterns don't fully represent who you are becoming. But because identity resists rapid change, your system defaults to what feels known. This creates internal friction, and friction without visible crisis feels like stagnation. You're not stuck because nothing is happening. You're stuck because your internal model hasn't caught up with your development. Your responsibilities may have changed, your exposure may have broadened, your thinking may have matured. But if your self-concept remains anchored in an older narrative, your behavior stays calibrated to that narrative. And behavior rarely exceeds belief for long. There's also a neurological reason this feels heavy. The brain values predictability over potential. Even a limiting identity offers stability. Reinvention, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty feels threatening, even when it leads to growth. So your mind quietly preserves the familiar version of you, not because it's ideal, but because it's safe. That's why forcing productivity doesn't solve this. You can push yourself into temporary action, but if the action conflicts with your internal definition of who I am, it drains you. You experience this as inconsistency, but underneath it, it's identity misalignment. Another layer most people miss. You may be chasing goals that belong to a past version of you, goals shaped by old environments, old expectations, old fears. If your identity has begun shifting internally, but your goals haven't updated, you feel directionless, even while achieving. This isn't lack of ambition, it's outdated alignment. So what actually moves you forward? Not more effort, observation. Instead of asking, what should I do differently? Ask, who have I been operating as? Is that identity still accurate, or is it just familiar? Where are you maintaining a version of yourself that no longer fits? Clarity begins there. Feeling stuck without visible failure is not weakness. It's a transition state. It means your internal architecture is reorganizing, but reorganization feels like stillness before it feels like momentum. Because identity shifts quietly before behavior changes visibly. You don't need to panic. You don't need to overhaul your life overnight. You need to notice where your self-concept is outdated and allow it to evolve intentionally. Because when identity expands, action stabilizes, not through force, through alignment. If this resonates, take a moment today and ask yourself, what version of me am I still trying to live from? And is that version still true? Growth doesn't begin with urgency. It begins with awareness. Stay with that, and we'll keep exploring from there.